I wanted to tell this story for some reason today. So Stephen Covey, who is the author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, includes in that book, maybe other ones, a story about a guy on a subway. And I'm gonna just kind of like I'm gonna retell it as best I can, and I'm gonna add some names so it's easier. And then I'm gonna tell you when his story ends. We'll do a little analysis of it, and then I'll add on his story, and then we'll do an analysis of that. So if you're just joining, I am talking about, let's say unnecessary suffering. So thanks everybody for coming. It's been so long. All right, so the story that Stephen Covey tells is basically there's a guy on a subway, and let's call him Joe. So Joe's riding on the subway, and another gentleman comes on. Let's call him Brad. And with Brad comes a few children. And so Joe just kind of minding his business in his little subway chair. And Brad is doing the same. He's just kind of sitting there. But Joe notices that Brad's kids are all over the place. They're yelling, they're screaming, they're hanging, they're fighting, they're blah, blah, blah. And they're getting louder and louder and louder. And Joe at first is like, but as time progresses, he's like, come on, bro, are you going to do something about your kids? And he gets pretty upset, and he's waiting, nothing happens. And so Joe looks at Brad, he's like, bro, what the fuck? What are you going to do about your kids? And Brad's like, I'm sorry, man, they just lost their mom. They're not really sure how to process it, and I don't think I am either. So that's the story that Stephen Covey tells. I'm going to close that piece. Let's do a little bit of an analysis. So Covey's point is, hold on, one son of a gun, 1 second. One second. Sorry. It's flying termite season in New Orleans right now. They swarmed me twice. It was like Mothman prophecies. I don't know what that actually means, but like this whole area was just covered. That was my landlord. God bless him. Okay. So Stephen's point was basically like, hey, you don't really know what's going on in somebody's life, so how about you don't judge them and just kind of be compassionate. So what I want to talk about is Joe's experience. So here is Joe. I tried to write it backwards. Joe is experiencing some level of physical discomfort because of the noise. These kids are loud. He's not able to relax. They're probably a little like not dangerous, but maybe they're not being careful. So Joe is experiencing some level of physical discomfort. On top of that, Joe is also having the experience that this is wrong. So he has the physical discomfort, but then he has the mental discomfort because he thinks that it shouldn't be like this. If Joe was at a concert or a park with a bunch of kids, he wouldn't have this layer because he expected it to be that way. And so here's his baseline of discomfort. This is his actual experience. And then he's applying a level of meaning that says this experience is wrong, and it's causing him additional turmoil or stress inside, tension. On top of that, he is probably having some level of personal reflection where he's saying like, come on, these are just kids, like cool off. It's okay. So now he is having tension about his tension. He might also be having some level of frustration because he's like, hey, why isn't this guy doing something? So that's another level of, I think something should be happening that it's not. And then he might also be having a layer on top of that that's like, should I say something? What if I say something? Am I mean if I say something? Blah, blah, blah. And so here's Joe's like tiny little amount of physical discomfort that he just blew the fuck up because of ideas that he has about it. So now, let's take Stephen's story, and this is where I'm gonna like riff a little bit more. Let's say that it's later revealed. So essentially Brad is like, hey man, they lost their mom. We don't really know how to handle it. All of these other layers kind of collapse, even the bottom one with the discomfort, because he could feel compassion. And so he was having all of this in his head without all of the information. So So now he has new information, and that changes his experience. Crazy, right? So now let's say that it's later revealed that Brad was having an affair and was drinking a lot, and that is what caused his wife to get sick and die. How does that affect Joe's experience of what happened? The actual physical thing is still the same, but now we have different information. It first went away and now comes back a little. But let's say then it's also revealed that the reason that he was doing that was because she wasn't attentive or able to connect or and so then it's like, was it his fault? Is it her fault? And then let's say it's later revealed that Brad went through some traumatic experience as a child, and she had an alcoholic as a father, and so neither of them really had the skill set to do there and be there. So who's to blame? Where does this all stem from? Who can Joe be mad at? When he retells the story about how he was the victim on the subway and how he was annoyed by the kids that were there, who does he point the finger at? Whose fault is it that he was so uncomfortable? Do you see what I'm doing here? And so you could follow those trees back, until you just find that underneath all of it is somebody who was scared and didn't really know how to handle their emotions, or somebody who was really experienced a lot of pain or scarcity, etc., and they just weren't given a toolkit to work with it. And so the unresolved or unaddressed stuff just kind of like puppeted them around, and so they didn't really want to be distant towards their husband. They didn't really want to drink. They didn't really want to engage in negative thinking that made them sick, and yet they did, because of these invisible things behind them that they never sat down with. And you wonder, like, can you even sit down? Like, should you sit down? How do you sit down? What do you do? How do you break this chain? And I think all I can really come to terms, like the best that I can do with this, and I'm open to commentary from the crowd, the best that I can do is that you interrupt it by holding just this. You let all this other shit, because all this other stuff is really what causes the conflict, because you're assigning motives and meanings that you don't even really know. And let's say you do kind of know the complexity of situations, the interrelatedness of everything, you don't really know. And so you can point at one person, but behind them is a village, and behind them is a famine, and behind them was a tornado. And so what looks like bad people are really just like accumulations of, let's say, lack of love, lack of acceptance, lack of resources. And the reason that I'm bringing this up, or why I think this is relevant, is what people are trying to do is, or it seems to me anyhow, is find some level of peace in themselves. And they're looking at all of these other layers to create their peace. They're sort of saying like, well, when this guy gets his kids under control, or he becomes more aware, or this, or blah, blah, blah. But all of this belongs to Joe. This is all his shit. These are all his interpretations and the meanings that he's applying, and none of it, like I said, actually shakes out as real, even when it can be verified, because the data set, the information about that event is never complete. It can't be. It can't. So it seems like all we can really do to kind of like change the world or help is just kind of like be with our own experience in a way that helps us put down the shadows or the bullshit that moves us in a way that causes more stuff. So does that make sense? I have some feedback from the people. That was my story for today. I'm a little rusty. You're hanging around because you want to see if the termite flies come. Let's hope not. I don't think they are today. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Any personal experience? I'm going to recap just for practice. So what I talked about today was someone who was having an experience where they were annoyed about what somebody else was doing. And underneath that annoyance was some level of physical discomfort. On top of their physical discomfort, they started to tell some stories about what could be or what should be. And then they also told stories about what their experience of what could be or should be. And then they also told stories about what actions were for. They did all these things inside. In stillness, he was just sitting there stewing. And then he got some information that made him feel a little sheepish, because basically all of his anger was built on an assumption that wasn't real. How much of life do you really know what's happening? We march around assigning all these motives to people, all of these stories that couldn't possibly be true, but because they kind of remind us of something else, and it sort of makes sense in the overall story that we're telling, and whoa, maybe it's like this, and god damn it, I can't believe they did that, and whoa. You know what's really funny? I'm sorry, I'm gonna say this, like, Joe's probably doing this because on some level he doesn't feel good about himself, and he's concerned. Like, imagine this as bandwidth. So he's got all these layers. If Joe was using his bandwidth to grow forward, maybe he would have to challenge himself in a new way. Maybe he would have to risk being seen as foolish. Maybe he'd have to make a mistake. Maybe he'd stumble a little. Maybe he'd find out that the other illusion that he had wasn't real. And so it seems so much safer if we just stack our bandwidth where we are and use it to analyze what other people are doing, or rather, what they should be doing. And that's my presentation for today. Questions, comments, thoughts, feelings. Okay, I'd say another thing, and like noticing that you're doing this, there is a layer in here that is going to talk shit on what you're doing. Don't believe that layer either. You might have a layer that's like, oh my god, I can't believe you're doing this again. You know better. You know this isn't real. Why are you doing this? That guy doesn't belong in the lineup either. He's not doing anything. Whatever you're doing, and that's it. That's it. You accept it. And accepting it basically means you say, like, okay, this is our ground. This is where we're standing right now. Another example I was thinking about, I guess I'll just keep talking because here we are. Another example I was thinking about was, like, imagine that, okay, let's kind of like transform this to a room that Joe lives in, or a house that Joe lives in. And let's say that this is all messiness. This is his dirty house. So Joe might find it easier to talk about how Brad's house is messy, because then Joe won't have to deal with the mess at his house, which seems a little overwhelming, right? And this is like why I got into this work. And it was a personal experience I have. Like, I started with some shit here in this life, like, blessedly. I couldn't get myself to do stuff, like some stuff that was really important. And I couldn't understand, like, why I couldn't, like, do what was right for me. And I kept fucking, like, I would take stuff on that was essentially like, I'd be building this beautiful castle or this beautiful house of cards, and then I'd be like, I should bring in something that's going to knock it over. Hey, you look like you're going to knock it over. Why don't you come over here and play? Anyhow, there's like, it sometimes feels like your hands are tied. Like you can't do it. And it's because on some level, like that judgment layer is saying you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And you identify with being wrong in such a way that you think that the messiness is you, and you sort of allow for it to continue because you think like deeply, very deeply, it's at a subconscious level, you think like, this is who I am and this is how it is, like this is just what I am. But that's not real either. And the way to get at that is not to try to force yourself to change. It's not to look at you and say, you should do better. You know better. Why aren't you doing better? That doesn't work. If that worked, everybody would be where they wanted. What works what worked for me, what works for my clients, is to say like, hey, maybe this messiness is okay. Maybe underneath this messiness, I've been growing a really cool mushroom farm. Maybe underneath this messiness, I've accumulated a bunch of really cool treasures and trinkets. Maybe, and you just kind of like let it be. You stop fighting it. You stop fighting it. You sit down in your house, however messy it is, and you love it as it is. You start to love, you're like, oh man, I love how I leave the chips on the floor. Oh man, that smudge on the wall, that's my favorite. And you start to appreciate it. And when you love it, when you love your house, when you love yourself, then you start to take care of it. And then you start to care about the thoughts that you're entertaining, because they determine your quality of life. Joe made himself fucking miserable over a bunch of his own bullshit, his own ideas. When you love yourself and you care for yourself, you don't make yourself miserable because you see, one, it's fruitless. This did nothing for him. This did nothing for anybody. But you also see like, hey, this is my life. This is my moment. This is my life. Why would I make my life miserable? This is my party. Why would I ruin my own party? At the same time, it also gives you the freedom that if you want to cry or you want to feel sad or you want to be whatever, you can, because it's yours. This is yours. It's your house. You live there. It's very freeing. It's like the most incredible experience in the world. And you wouldn't, if you haven't had it, like, you wouldn't even think it's real. But it is. It's like, it's such peace, because you're not running around looking for solutions for all the shit that's not real. You're not trying to figure out why they did that or what they're going to do next or how you're going to have that conversation or what this is going to be like. None of it matters, because you're right here in your house, and all that matters is what you take in, what you choose, what you entertain. And if your house is messy, like, chances are you're fucking blessed. And this goes out to all my ex-men, because if you have not, if you feel like you started with like the shitty side up or like the dark side of the coin up, oh my friend, wait till you turn that bitch over. Wait till you see the other side. It is so good. And you only have to learn how to wield what originally or at some times may have hurt you. Oh, you're oversensitive, you're too compassionate, you're too much of a pushover, you try too hard, you're too this, you're too that. Oh my friend, wait till you flip that for you. It's so good. It is so good. All the shit that you think is bad or wrong about you, all the stuff you hate in your house, like, it's almost like you can fairy wand twinkle it into something really magical and beautiful. And you do that through acceptance. You do that through love. Preach. Look, I wouldn't believe it. I'll probably cry at some point about it. I wouldn't have believed it, except that, like, there is somewhere over the rainbow. Those who have always existed in struggle can't imagine what it's like to beyond that line. There are people who haven't had that experience, and they look at the people underneath the line and they're like, why do you do this to yourself? Why are you like, anybody can get a job, anybody can do that, like, why don't they just do that? If they could just do that, they would just do that. The people below the line look at the people above the line and think like, oh, over there they must be miserable, there must be something wrong. No, there's not. Like, maybe for some, maybe, but there is a place of wholeness and sustainability where you are in peace, and it's fucking awesome. And you know that, you know what's yours, you know what you need to be with, you know what you can fold, you know what conversations you need to have, you know what you can like tolerate, and it's fucking amazing. So if you've been doing the work and you've been trying to whatever, if you want to know the secret, if you really want to know how to do it, I'll tell you. Write this down. Get out your pens. Okay, I'll write it down for you. This is my to-do list. I have to write backwards. practice pretending you're there. That's it. That's how you make the leap. You pretend you know. What would it feel like if I didn't have to worry about fixing my shit? What would it feel like if I felt good about my house? What would it feel like if I was proud of my life? What would it feel like if I could trust that life was going to meet me? What would it be like if I could be in peace and relief and know that I was loved and supported? What would it feel like if I was confident? And under all, it's just relief. You practice feeling relief. No shit. It's that simple. The hard part is letting it be that simple. Unless you want to just lean on my belief, which I'll give it to you. And then you can, from there, just live. You get out of your little cyclone of bullshit, of not real stories, of not moving anywhere. You get out of your cyclone and you live your life. You just go on and you do stuff, and you try stuff, and you explore, and sometimes you fall down, and sometimes, oh, that's okay. You just keep going, and you live before you die. And see. Okay. That's it. That's all I've got. If you haven't seen, I have a new link tree in my bio. It's got a bunch of links to all the podcasts, or most of the podcasts that I've been on. There is also a link to schedule an info session that is a no pressure. Hey, you tell me what you're working with. You see if maybe that's something I could help you with. I'll give it to you real. I don't take on anything that's not mine, and I can't work for money in a way that's like, hey, you should give it to me. So if you have something that I can sincerely help you with, like, I'll tell you, and if I can't, I'll tell you that as well. And you're welcome to do whatever you want with that information now, later, blah, 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 blah. There's also a place to schedule a single session where you can book directly. They can be very helpful if you're not ready to do a package. There is also a place for a tip jar, which I saw Twitter also just came out with, but I really appreciate having an audience here. If anything I say is helpful to you and you're feeling like you want to leave a tip, like, go for it. There's also a link there now to my photography, because my dad got me a camera so I could practice. If you want to check that out. The swag shop is currently down, but that will be up eventually soon. I want to do some new designs. Does anybody have any questions, thoughts, feelings, comments, feedback? I'm a little out of practice. Thanks so much for coming. If you have any topics that you would like me to speak to, or questions on what I've covered, hit me, slide into my DMs. If I'm not responsive, try emailing me, admin or Shaylee@habitbook.com, Shaylee@habitbook.com. I don't spend as much time on my DMs as I could or should. Nah, I do as much as I want. Let's be real. But if you'd like to reach me more quickly, feel free to email me. Thanks so much for coming, guys. I really appreciate it. Love to hear your feedback at some point. Have a great evening.